Mercedes have made this season look easy. 10 pole positions in a row. Kimi Antonelli sitting on top of the championship with 6 wins, cruising toward a title Mercedes have not won since 2021. And Ferrari, the team everyone circled before the season, have spent every weekend giving away lap time on the straights, staring at an engine deficit they cannot fix until after the summer. So this week, when Sky Sports' Ted Kravitz sat down to preview the Hungarian Grand Prix, nobody expected him to put a target on Mercedes. He did anyway. He laid out the case that Ferrari, right now, have the best chance of anyone to beat Mercedes this weekend. Not close the gap, beat them. And it comes down to one thing about this racetrack that flips everything Ferrari has been fighting all year long. This weekend does not come down to the engine, it comes down to the corners. The Hungaroring is the most extreme corner circuit on the calendar, outside of Monaco. It is tight, it is twisty, it is one of the shortest laps of the year, and drivers are only at full throttle for a little over half of it. 14 corners, 70 laps, and almost no long straights to speak of. Which means the thing Ferrari has been losing on all season, raw power down a straight line, barely matters here. And the thing Ferrari does better than any other car on the grid, carry speed through corners, is exactly what wins this race. That is the whole argument in one sentence. On the one weekend where horsepower counts the least, Ferrari's best weapon counts the most. And if you want proof the car is ready for it, you do not have to look far. You just have to look at the last few races, on tracks that were supposed to expose Ferrari, not flatter them. But we will get to what happened at Silverstone and Spa, because it is the part that turned a hunch into a real prediction. First, the circuit itself, because once you understand the Hungaroring, the whole weekend makes sense. Power sensitivity is a real number engineers track from track to track. It measures how much lap time you gain or lose for every bit of engine power you have. At places like Montreal or Baku, with long full throttle blasts, power is worth a fortune, and a weak engine gets punished on every single lap. The Hungaroring sits at the opposite end of that scale. It is one of the least power-sensitive circuits of the entire season. The average speed around a lap is the second lowest on the calendar, behind only the streets of Monaco. Drivers spend close to half the lap off full throttle, braking, turning, feeding the power back in through slow corners. So the engine deficit that costs Ferrari dearly on a track like Spa shrinks to almost nothing here. What matters instead is downforce, mechanical grip, and traction out of slow corners. That is a completely different test, and it happens to be a test built around the SF-26's strengths. There is a second reason the Hungaroring matters this much. Overtaking here is close to impossible. It has been called Monaco without the walls for decades, and the nickname is earned. The lap is narrow, the corners flow straight into each other, and clean passing spots are rare. Even the overtaking aids are limited, with just 2 short DRS zones, so the usual escape route for a quick car stuck in traffic barely exists, which means qualifying decides almost everything. Whoever starts at the front usually finishes at the front. This is the part everyone misses at first. On most tracks, strong race pace can rescue a bad Saturday. Here, it cannot. If Ferrari can put the car on the front row, the circuit itself protects them all the way to the flag. And there is a third factor that quietly favours Ferrari. Budapest in late July is hot, and this is a track that punishes the rear tyres. Traction and tyre management become the difference in the closing laps. All season, one of the SF-26's real strengths has been looking after its tyres over a long run. On a hot Sunday where everyone else is sliding around, that is worth real time. One more thing about this place before we move on. The outright lap record here still belongs to Lewis Hamilton, a 1 minute 16.627, set back in 2020. Hold that name for a second, because it comes back later in a big way. Now, the SF-26 itself. To understand why Kravitz is backing this car, you have to understand exactly what it is and what it is not. What it is the best cornering car on the grid. All season, even on weekends Ferrari lost, the one thing rivals kept pointing to was how much speed that car carries through a corner. The chassis is strong, the aerodynamic grip is there, and the balance in slow and medium corners has been a genuine strength since the very first race of the year. What it is not is a rocket down the straights. Ferrari's power unit is the problem, and it is not a small one. The FIA's own assessment after Canada found Ferrari's internal combustion engine was more than 4% down on the benchmark unit in the field. 4% does not sound dramatic until you translate it into lap time on a power track. Charles Leclerc himself has said publicly the engine is quite down on horsepower and called it the car's main weakness. But the engine is only half of it. Mercedes also hold an edge in how they store and deploy their electrical energy. They can push harder for longer on the straights, both when chasing and when defending, and they recover it more efficiently under braking. On a circuit with long straights and heavy stops, that advantage is worth a fortune. It is a huge part of why Mercedes have been so hard to pass all year. Here is why all of that flips this weekend. At the Hungaroring, there are no long straights for Mercedes to lean on. There is nowhere to unload all that power and all that deployment advantage. The track quietly erases the exact gap Ferrari cannot close with parts right now. Everything Mercedes are best at needs a straight to matter, and this circuit barely has one. So on paper, it fits. But paper does not win races. Results do. And this is where that hunch became a real prediction, because we already watched Ferrari overperform on tracks that should have buried them. Rewind to Silverstone. That is a power circuit, fast and flowing, the kind of place Ferrari's deficit should have shown up in a big way. Instead, Charles Leclerc won it. His first victory of the season, ending a 624-day drought, stretching all the way back to Austin in 2024. And he did not do it alone. Hamilton finished third. A Ferrari double podium on a track nobody expected them to lead. And it gets better, because Mercedes did not just lose there, they got hurt. Antonelli started on pole at Silverstone and dropped out of the points entirely after a failure on his car and a track limits penalty. And he was not the only Mercedes to stumble this year. Russell lost a race in Canada to a failure of his own. The silver cars are fast, but they are not unbreakable. Then came Spa, and Ferrari did it again. Spa is the ultimate power track. Long straights, a full throttle climb up through Eau Rouge and Raidillon, the kind of layout where a weak engine gets swallowed whole. Antonelli took pole and won it for Mercedes, their 10th pole in a row. But right behind him, under 2 seconds back at the flag, was Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. He even led the race for a stretch after a well-timed stop before Antonelli fought back past him at Les Combes. Second place at Spa in a car down on power. On paper, that should have been a damage limitation weekend for Ferrari. It turned into a statement. And Ferrari did not just show up and hope on those tracks. They brought a clever low-drag rear wing to Silverstone and Spa, a package built to claw back top speed exactly where they needed it. Here is the twist. Hungary asks for the opposite of that wing. It asks for maximum downforce, the setup that leans straight into the SF-26's natural strength. So, if Ferrari could hang with Mercedes while fighting the car's weakness head-on, think about what happens when the track finally plays to its strength instead. And do not forget where this season really turned. Back in June in Barcelona, it was Lewis Hamilton who took his first win for Ferrari, on pure pace, leading home an all-British podium, the first the sport had seen in decades. It was the 106th win of his career, and it ended a drought that had stretched almost 2 years. So the idea that Ferrari somehow cannot beat Mercedes is already false. They have done it. The real question is whether they can do it again, on a track that suits them, against a Mercedes that is fully healthy. So the pattern is simple. On the tracks that were built to expose Ferrari's biggest weakness, Ferrari won, finished second, and stood on the podium. Now they arrive at the one track that hides that weakness completely. You can see why Kravitz did the math and landed where he did. This is where the championship picture matters though, because it keeps the whole thing honest. Ferrari being fast this weekend does not mean they are winning the title. They are not. Mercedes lead the constructors' standings with 358 points to Ferrari's 285. That is a 73-point gap, and it is real. Antonelli leads the drivers on 204 points, with 6 wins and 6 poles already banked. Hamilton sits second on 159, 45 points behind. Leclerc is fourth on 126. So this is not a story about Ferrari suddenly running away with 2026. It is something more specific, and honestly, more interesting. This is the cleanest chance Ferrari have had all year to beat Mercedes in a straight fight, on pure pace, on a track that takes away everything Mercedes are best at. Winning here would not win the championship. But this is the last race before the summer break, and a win going into that break flips the entire momentum story. Ferrari would spend 6 weeks as the team on the up, and Mercedes would spend it answering questions. With a long run of races still to come after the break, that momentum is worth far more than the points alone. And there is a human side to that pressure. The driver leading this championship, Kimi Antonelli, is still one of the youngest on the grid, carrying the weight of a title fight that almost nobody expected him to be leading this soon. 6 wins and 6 poles is a dream season for anyone, let alone a driver this early in his career. But a lead like that comes with a target on your back, and the closer you get to a first title, the heavier every weekend feels. If Ferrari can beat him head-to-head at a track where his car's advantages disappear right before 6 weeks of silence to think about it, that is the kind of result that gets into a young driver's head. Momentum in this sport is not just about the car, it is about who walks into the break believing they are the one to beat. To really appreciate what Ferrari are trying to pull off, you have to understand how Mercedes built a lead this big in the first place. It is not just the engine. The car underneath Antonelli is genuinely strong in its own right, quick in a straight line and stable under braking. Put a strong chassis together with the best power unit and the best energy deployment, and you get 10 poles in a row. There was also a controversy running underneath it. Earlier this year, rivals including Ferrari raised concerns about how the front-running engines behaved once they got hot, arguing they were effectively gaining an advantage as temperatures climbed. The FIA responded by tightening how it checks the engines under heat, adding a new hot running measurement from the start of June. Mercedes kept winning anyway. Whatever the fine print, the message was clear enough. This is a benchmark team operating right at the edge of the rules, and catching them has been almost impossible. Which is exactly why the Hungaroring is such a rare opening. It is one of the only places on the calendar where all of that Mercedes strength gets muted at once. Take away the straights, and you take away the deployment edge. Take away the top speed, and you take away the engine edge. What is left is a pure test of downforce, mechanical grip, and cornering, and that is the one test where Ferrari can look Mercedes right in the eye. Now, while everyone is talking about Ferrari's car, there is a second thread running under this whole weekend, and it has a name attached to it: Lewis Hamilton. Because nobody in the history of this sport owns the Hungaroring like Hamilton does. 8 wins here. 8. That is a record at this circuit, more than any driver has ever managed at a single venue. 9 pole positions on top of that. This is not a track he merely likes. This is a track that belongs to him. Those 8 wins did not come by accident. He won here as a young champion. He won here through his dominant Mercedes years, and when he took his 8th in 2020, he matched a record almost nobody thought would ever be touched: the most victories any driver had ever managed at a single Grand Prix. For a decade, if you wanted to beat Hamilton, the Hungaroring was the last place on earth you wanted to try it. That history does not evaporate just because he changed the color of his car. And here is the detail that gives this weekend its edge. The Hungaroring is where Hamilton took his last Grand Prix pole position back in 2023. Of every circuit on the calendar for Ferrari to suddenly find one lap pace, it is this one, the exact place where Hamilton has been faster than everyone else more often than anywhere in the world. Put that together. The car is suited to shine here. The driver has won here 8 times, and the track neutralizes the one thing holding Ferrari back. That is why this weekend feels different from every other one on the schedule. But let me be straight about where Hamilton actually is right now, because Spa was not his weekend. He finished 4th, and he made it hard on himself, picking up a 5-second penalty for a first-lap collision with George Russell that ended Russell's race on the spot. Hamilton has openly said he needs to step it up in Hungary. So this is not a driver arriving in perfect form. It is a driver arriving at the one track where he has always been able to find something extra, at exactly the moment his car is finally quick enough to let him use it. Which brings us to the part that keeps this from being a fairy tale, because there is a catch, and Ferrari know it better than anyone. Ferrari themselves are refusing to call this their weekend. When Leclerc was asked whether Ferrari could be the favourites, he pumped the brakes hard. He said they could be, but they could also not be, and he pointed straight at Monaco earlier this year. Another slow, twisty circuit that on paper should have suited Ferrari, where they quietly underperformed. Team principal Fred Vasseur, asked what he expected from Hungary, answered with a single dry word: nothing. That is not false modesty. That is a team that has been burned before by a track that looked perfect on paper. There is a technical version of that warning too. Modern Formula One cars carry so much downforce that the Hungaroring is not the slow mechanical track it was 20 years ago. The faster corners matter more than they used to, and that shifts the balance a little back toward the cars with the most all-round performance. So the low power advantage is real, but it is not the blank check some fans are treating it as. And Ferrari are not the only fast car showing up. McLaren arrive in Budapest with a new floor and fresh aero parts. And this is a team that scored back-to-back 1-2 finishes at this exact circuit in 2024 and 2025. If that upgrade works, this is not a Ferrari versus Mercedes duel at all. it becomes a three-way fight, and Ferrari would have to beat McLaren just to get to Mercedes. Then there is the number that hangs over everything, 10. Mercedes have taken 10 pole positions in a row. If they make it 11 on Saturday, the Hungaroring's biggest feature works against Ferrari instead of for them, because passing here is so hard that a Mercedes on pole is a Mercedes nobody can catch. The same circuit that would protect a fast Ferrari protects a fast Mercedes just as well. That is the knife edge this weekend sits on. Everything, and I mean everything, comes down to Saturday afternoon. And this is where strategy meets the stopwatch. Because overtaking is so hard here, teams cannot simply undercut and overcut their way to the front the way they can elsewhere. Track position is everything. Get qualifying wrong, and you can be the fastest car on Sunday and still finish exactly where you started, stuck in a train of cars with nowhere to go. That is the trap that has ruined plenty of quick cars at this circuit over the years. It also means the pressure on Saturday is enormous. One lap, one shot, in a session where a couple of hundredths decides whether you spend Sunday leading or spend it staring at the gearbox in front of you. For Ferrari, that raises the stakes and sharpens the chance at the same time. If the SF-26 really is the best car through these corners, qualifying is where it has to prove it, and qualifying is where it can lock the race down before it even starts. And there is one place a Ferrari could steal it even from the second row. The run from the grid down to the first corner at the Hungaroring is one of the longer flat-out stretches on the whole lap, which makes the launch and the first braking zone a genuine chance to gain positions before the field bottles up. All season, one of the SF-26's quiet trademarks has been an explosive getaway off the line. On a track where a clean pass on Sunday is almost impossible, the start is basically a second qualifying session. Get it right. And Ferrari could turn a front row start into a lead, or a third place into a fight for the win, all in the first 10 seconds. There is one more piece to this, and it is the piece that explains why the timing is so specific. Why this weekend and not later in the year? Ferrari have a real engine upgrade coming. A redesigned turbocharger, the next step in their power unit development, part of the special allowance they earned by falling far enough behind on power. They already took one step earlier in the year. A reworked engine that let them run hotter, introduced back at the Austrian Grand Prix. The turbocharger is the next piece, and it is the piece that is not ready yet. It is expected after the summer break at Zandvoort or Monza, which means for now, for this one race, Ferrari are still running the same package that has cost them all season on the straights. So think about what that actually means. The Hungarian Grand Prix is the last race before the summer break. It is also the last race before Ferrari's engine gets stronger. It is the one weekend where the circuit hands Ferrari the power they do not have yet, for free, by simply not asking for it. After Budapest, Ferrari get faster in a straight line on their own. But right now, before that fix lands, the only way for them to beat Mercedes on pace is to go somewhere the straight line does not decide the race. And that place is here, this weekend, on this track. That is not a coincidence Kravitz stumbled onto. That is the entire logic. The one track that erases Ferrari's weakness lands on the calendar at the exact moment before Ferrari erase that weakness themselves. If they were ever going to catch Mercedes without the engine, it has to be now, before the break, on this layout. So the real question this weekend is not whether Ferrari have the pace. Silverstone, Spa and Barcelona already answered that. The question is whether they can put it on pole on Saturday, because at the Hungaroring, whoever leads into turn 1 usually leads across the line. If a red car is on the front row when the lights go out, everything you just heard becomes very real, very fast. If Mercedes grab an 11th pole instead, the same walls that could protect Ferrari trap them behind. Either way, the weekend that decides it is not some far-off race on the schedule. It is the one starting right now, on the one track built to flip this entire season on its head.